Hey everyone, so welcome to Spec 3.0 meeting. We're gonna give a couple of minutes for people to join. So in case you want to join as well, I am gonna share a link in the chat. There we go. So you can join the discussions, and if you have any questions, ask them there. But other than that, I think we just start at 5:05 or something like that. A lot of people joining.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Restream is actually handling this quite well. I'm actually surprised. Hello.
How are you doing?
Is it only for me that Fran is lagging out?
You're sounding
like
a bit
cyborg.
I have what, sir?
You're a cyborg.
That's what he sounds like. He sounds like that normally.
Terminator. Yeah.
I'm gonna kill you all. So it still has a problem.
I'm gonna like turn you down a bit, Fran, until it's like fixed, because you're ruining everyone's ears, I think. Let's try again. No. I'm not sure if this would be better, so everyone can see the chats as well. Let's see. But then the text is like, I don't know. I think we hit the limit now, actually, which is a bit unfortunate. Lucas, is it true that, I know you're in the chat, is it true that we can only be 10 on stream at a time? Because then we might need to switch to Zoom. Oh well.
I don't mind switching to YouTube and freeing up space. I can always heckle through the comments if I have something to say.
Yeah, there's no one currently in the queue to join, so let's see what happens. All right. I think we will just start it off and see what happens. If there's anyone, I think we hit a limit now on restream, unfortunately. So if anybody here wants to join or ask questions, you can just write in the chat and let's see what happens. But apparently, as Lucas says, we have professional pen, so maybe it's not a problem. It just gave me a warning, so I don't know. Yeah, Fran also confirmed that there is a limit. All right, but yeah, let's get started. So welcome everyone, wherever you are and whatever time it is where you're currently at. So this is kind of like an update meeting or a meeting for any parties that are interested in helping to push 3.0 forward. Everyone is welcome to add to the agenda or ask questions during the stream. And yeah, otherwise we'll just follow the agenda, and there will be plenty of room to, of course, ask questions to each individual agenda item. But other than that, there will be no decisions on this meeting. It's purely for having a platform to talk things through that might be a bit difficult in issues or comments. But yeah, does anyone have any questions so far? Anything they would like to add? All right. So I guess I'll start off. So at the moment we have a JSON schema document that's kind of like a validation file for any async API documents. So this means that whenever we change something in the specification, it means that we have to change the JSON schema document as well to validate accurate async API documents. Currently, everything is just defined within one huge document. For example, for 2.2, you would have to make changes to this entire very, very large document, which is not great for a user experience for making changes. So to that effort, I have split out I've split all of the individual components into each separate JSON schema document. This means that it's much more easier to make changes and to suggest new changes and review them as well. Because it's so small. And whenever we release a new document or a new version, we bundle all of these things together to form this huge document in the end. So you still have everything comprised into one specific document. I'm gonna link the PR in the chat. So if you have any questions or any suggestions that we need to do it differently, it's bad user experience, whatever it might be, feel free to leave a comment or review. Does anyone have any questions for that? It's more or less finished, the PR, so it's in the final stages.
I mean, it sounds like a fantastic idea. I guess this would be an interesting sort of use case for me to understand. So the PR is opened. Essentially, what happens next? Like we add comments into it. Is there actually some sort of voting process, or how does that get decided to move forward?
It's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure on the answer. For example, I've in the end added a comment in the end taking the code owners of the repository, how to move forward with it. So if you have anything that should be a blocker to this PR, it's just about adding a comment to it. Other than that, yeah, it's just dynamically. There's no, it's up to the code owners in the end. And of course, if you feel that this is an entirely wrong approach, then that should be brought up as well, because that would be a blocker, right? So
No, I think it's entirely the right approach. I'm just wondering, since this seems like a really great thing to start with, sort of the restructuring is great infrastructure to, allow multiple streams of work potentially. What does it look like moving forward so we can use that as a baseline?
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions to that specific agenda item? All right, moving on. So we have a lot of discussion, or we had a lot of discussions about what is the meaning of an async API file. At the moment, it's representing the interface for how others may interact with your application. To that extent, there's also been some usage of the async API file being used as a common document, meaning that you would have no specific channels defined in your async API document, but you define all of the components reusable parts. Now, in order to clarify what exactly an async API document should be used for, we kind of split it up into multiple sub PR or sub issues. Currently, we have one specific one that is, should you be able to define a collection of multiple applications within an async API file? It is just to have some food for thought for later. Maybe for next meeting you have some questions about it. So it's more to raise awareness, because this would be a breaking change to the specification. And if we can include as much as possible into one, that would be preferable, of course, if it makes sense. I'm gonna link the issue in the chat so everyone have the possibility to jump in and voice their opinion. Any questions for that?
No questions. I think just a comment that, I think the philosophy of this is pretty important. I think to this point, we've envisioned async API as sort of a file-based API. In other words, there's one API and that gets defined within the file, and that's an actual physical file. I think what we're seeing emerge, sort of particularly with cloud events, is that there's different representations potentially of async API, both within a file sitting on a hard drive, but also more in terms of registry type solutions. And I think it's important, this is my personal view, since we're here to discuss things. I think the more flexible we can make it, async API, to accommodate various different ways of representing async API beyond just having a file, I think is better. And I think we're making a good step forward with these sort of reusable components. But I think we need to spend more time and thought about how to push even further.
Yep, I agree. Definitely. And it's a huge subject as well, right? Because there's a lot of features within that specific questions. What should you define in an async API document? It's a huge question. And it's going to take a lot of time and effort to push that forward. So we're looking for as many feedbacks as we can for that specific issue. I guess we can jump to the next one. Jesse, do you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, the American is talking the most, which is always makes me feel a little self-conscious, but I will continue to talk because that's what we do. So I will say, I do think sort of what does an async API represent, and how do we what are the various manifestations of it? I think is a really bedrock concept that I think like what I said, we should have discussions on GitHub certainly, but also I think having a live discussion also would be really, really helpful. And I think another real bedrock question that we need to answer is perhaps how slavish are we going to be to JSON schema? And I know that we've got a couple JSON schema experts on here, which I think is fantastic. I know that, just drawing from the Open API experience, it seems like they diverged from JSON schema pretty significantly and seem to have regretted that. I know Ken's on the call, and maybe he can speak to his experience there. So I guess my main motivation in bringing that up is to sort of come up with our official stance on it, and also perhaps draw from what I understand to be the pain of the OAS experience. Or maybe there wasn't. Maybe there wasn't, Ken.
No, I mean, I can speak to it. I would frame it more as bending the JSON schema rather than moving away from JSON schema. We bent it and didn't stick to it, which caused a lot of pain and suffering for everybody involved. And then we've gone back to it and supporting the latest draft.
And my understanding is that there is a rule set associated with async API. Sorry, with Open API that is sort of like an overlay with JSON schema. Is that right? Somewhere along the line there. I was meant to research that,
Yeah.
and it didn't.
So Open API and async API are considered vocabularies of JSON schema. So there's also like forms vocabularies. So JSON schema core is meant for validation. Now, the majority of folks view it as a modeling specification, but it is used for that in reality, but that's not its sole intended purposes. Its intended purposes for validation. So when you start using it for alternate purposes in this way, it falls under the umbrella of vocabularies, and that's what async API and Open API currently are.
Got it. And just so I can situate myself, is async API currently like in line with JSON schema? Have we already diverged from it? Are we, or is that what was our current status in terms of async API?
Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I can talk a bit. I don't have all the insights, but I have experienced some things lately about it, so I investigated a bit. We are using draft 7, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And there have been several drafts after it, and there are like a couple of issues. I think Maciek created in order to move forward and keep up with latest versions. What happened in there is that when I say we, it's Jonas and I. That's why if you check the blog on Async API, you will see that Jonas wrote a blog post about it. So we went down to a rabbit hole investigating about it. What is our real usage of JSON schema? And what features are we using? And we realized that there are some things that we are not even using from JSON schema. We are not aligned with even draft 7. We don't use all the potential JSON schema provides, right? So what is the status? The status is that it seems we wanted to update and keep up with latest versions. We realized there are some things that are hard to implement, and more than hard, I would say it doesn't make sense from the point of view of Async API to implement. I will try to link to the issue later, so there are more context in that. I'm not saying we have to discard JSON schema, but maybe more than that, we have to consider to use JSON schema to what it is designed for, I guess, right? So for validation.
Maciek, do you want to jump in with the progress and maybe an update on the last agenda items now?
Yeah, I can.
That might make sense.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, for everyone, because probably
not all people know about my proposal. I created a few months ago the idea how to solve the problem to reference another schema format than JSON schema, Avro, and RAM, and the other that we at the moment support, like the XML schema definition or GraphQL or Protobuf in our Essence API.
It's this
And
one, right?
yeah, exactly. And the main problem at the moment is that we don't have the clarification how exactly the referencing worked in the Essence API. We use the JSON pointers, but we have also, as I remember, some points that it uses something like the JSON schema referencing behavior, and this is the problem. Because, for example, the JSON schema reference only allows you to use the another JSON schema instance, but not something like that, like the string, the normal string. And it's very important, for example, for XSD or GraphQL, because you cannot reference the XSD format or GraphQL types inside the JSON. It will be referencing as the string, and this is the main problem of this proposal. How exactly the references works inside the Essence API. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think. Sorry.
Mhm.
I want to make sure I was on mute. I think that's, from my perspective, a really big thing. Both for Solace, who I represent, and myself, coming from my experience, like async communication frequently involves things that is not JSON.
Yeah.
So to be able to expand out into that world, I was engaged with Magic on that, and I've unfortunately fallen off. But I would love for that discussion to be something that a focal point of this as well. And I hate to keep on referring back to Ken, but I know that OpenAPI has struggled with sort of these non-JSON formats as well. And I was wondering if we can draw upon any experience from that perspective as well.
Yeah, exactly. Inside this proposal, I have an example for Protobuf XSD, so we can jump in and comment. But
Okay.
yeah, the main problem at the moment is how exactly the reference works.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I remember now thinking back, as it seems like we've got some overlap with OpenAPI on that, and like, what's the latest on how they're attacking that, Ken? Although I know you're sort of distanced from OpenAPI at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I would put it. OpenAPI is pretty focused on the latest JSON schema draft and supporting that, but nothing beyond that, because OpenAPI is very focused on HTTP synchronous APIs and keeping JSON schemas as the validation and modeling. So I think all energy was put on getting it back on track with that. There is no discussion or, from what I understand, desire to branch out when it comes to protocol buffers or Avro or Thrift or any other realms.
Or even XML.
Yeah, or even XML. So,
wow.
So it's a pretty narrow view right now, and I don't think I haven't seen any champions looking to go beyond it, beyond the async API or async API specifications conference, which is meant to be a multi-specification and bring in across all of the specs and leveraging the Linux Foundation to do it. But it's not about bringing that into the specification itself. It's just more about sharing of information. So I know of no efforts to branch beyond JSON schema and just keep it in line with where it's at right now. So
darn. That would have been really helpful. All right. Well, I guess we're on our own then.
Just my take on it, maybe. So I really like the idea that maybe we can distance entirely ourselves from how you define message payloads. So we shouldn't, in async API, care whether you use JSON schema, Avro, XML, whatever format you actually use. That should be entirely up to your use case, in my opinion. And that is kind of the direction we are taking now, or at least moving towards with Magic's proposals. The only cavity, and this is where we have as an advantage, I would say, is that we have tooling with us. Because one of the issues is that as soon as you allow multiple different schema formats to be defined, tooling has to handle it. If you have code generation or parsing or UI document, if you have a UI that wants to render, for example, how a payload should conform to, then you need to know the format or you need to handle it some other way. The way that we currently are doing it is that we transform Avro, for example, to JSON schema. That means that whenever you use tooling, the parser only gives you the JSON schema representation. And we need to have some kind of, eventually we will reach that point where we have to have a way to handle that in tooling. And we have a unique opportunity to do it here because we have tooling with the spec. We just need to figure out how to handle it.
Well, that raises an interesting question. I like that perspective. So is it a case where we actually, instead of defining, do we need like a format binding in addition to like protocol bindings? You know, the Avros and the protobufs of the world aren't the last thing to emerge, certainly. There's going to be more, and there's already a billion, you know, protocols out there. Is this something that we need to support instead of hard coding or just treating it as strings? Do we instead, you know, like Dave speaks to the power of plugins with his event catalog? Is this another place where binding / plugins can do some lifting?
We actually already
Maybe. I mean, I do think we need a way that doesn't push all of this down to individual tooling. Like, there is a benefit to having JSON schema as the lowest common denominator, so individual tools don't need to worry about it. They deal with a consistent schema. So yeah, I think if we can come up with a way that a plugin based approach would achieve that same goal of not pushing complexity to every individual tool to duplicate, that would be good. But I think that would be an important requirement.
Totally, you're right. And then that, I think avoiding the some standards that are so flexible that they're essentially no standards, I think is a great counterpoint to that. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only so much we could do with plugins at the spec level, if that's what you're talking about. I mean, when I think of, for example, the code generator, I worked on the Java Spring Cloud Stream generator. In order to support XML, for example, you know, I mean, I could do it. I could just have to say, well, okay, this document, it's pointing to an XSD schema, and I know how to do that in Java. I know how to call, you know, there's libraries that'll read the XSD and generate the appropriate Java class that represents that. But I mean, at some point, like, that has to be done at the tooling level, I think. I don't think there's any place in like our parser or other tools that could do that for us. So I think, you know, at some point the rubber hits the road, and, you know, whatever generator or other downstream tools want to accommodate these different schema types, they will have to do some work to do that. I don't think there's any escaping that. It's just, I think what we need to do is we need to provide a way to do that, right? So that we have the async API document that could, you know, sort of point to a file and says, yeah, here's a schema, it's XSD, here's a file name, like have a URI that points to a local file in a local directory or whatever it happens to be, you know, or, yeah, I was thinking along those lines.
Yeah, it's interesting because then it doesn't get pulled into, like, if we're using refs, then it gets pulled into sort of the main definition, and then it has to be
that's why we have to have something else that's not like a JSON reference to another file. It has to be something that, you know, is opaque as far as JSON goes and says, this is just a link to some external file. Don't try and read it. Don't try and parse it, because you won't be able to, right?
Or you label what the content type is, so that if that particular implementation can parse it, then it goes off and tries to parse it. Otherwise, it leaves it be.
I mean, that kind of fits in with what we've got now, like with the Avro plugin, for example, because we do we do know what the schema type is. It's in the async API document, right? Like the content type of the schema. So
Cool.
Magic, what do you need to move forward with your proposals?
Clarify this behavior with reference only. Yeah, because also inside this idea, I have the idea how to, for example, add the additional options to the given parser for Avro, XML, etc. So maybe the problem for you, Michael, will be something like that you exactly add the reference to the given file, but also add the options. Please do not parse, something like that, yes. And we can go with the direction. And also, if you want, you can also add the reference, but the reference of the syntax XML, not the JSON pointer, yeah? Because also this is the problem inside the Essence API. For example, in the Avro, as I remember, you have the namespaces. And if you make the reference, you can also make the reference by the namespace, not by the absolute path to the given value, yes? And at the moment, we don't support that. But with this additional option to the parser, to the custom parser, we can also do that, yes, in this way.
Yeah, well, I think that raises an interesting point because we were struggling with that with XML as well. Because if you have multiple root elements within XML, you need like an XPath or some sort of equivalent there. So it's like, I guess, which seems to me because we're going to run across these sort of idiosyncratic things for each format. Maybe that points to sort of a format binding kind of thing where we don't have 87 different options that that are just one-offs for XML, one-off for protobuf, but rather you have this sort of bindings to protobufs, and that includes the options you need potentially to understand the protobuf.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually kind of like that suggestion. Is it written down anywhere, Jesse?
Probably not, but I can take an action item to write that down.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah.
I'm not sure if we could call them bindings, though, because we don't want to get confused with, the protocol specific bindings that we've got. Right. This is different. This is like schema type bindings, which maybe if we use the word bindings, we'll get confused.
Maybe.
Yeah. I'll come up with something snazzy.
Yeah, please do. All right. I guess that anyone have any more questions to that subject?
I got a question about the schema stuff. So, proposal to allow defining any schema format. Are we getting a lot of feedback from the community that they don't like the default schema format? Just out of interest, I like where the idea originate from, and who's like, and kind of what group of people are pushing that, or is it the group, or is it the people here? If you see what I mean. Just out of interest, yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk. So we've got a number of people in the healthcare space. Healthcare is still using EDI 30 years later, and so there's we have healthcare clients that are like, well, why can't we define an EDI document with async API? That sucks. And then we've got people that are taking information out of SAP and that's in XML, and they're like, well, what the hell? Why can't we define an XML payload? And like. So it's all over the place. But those are the sort of the two major use cases that we're sort of interested in, at least.
Okay, and they're just completely put off then.
Well, they're not totally put off, but they're like, I don't know. I'm not English, so I don't know what level of anger put off means, but they're irritated, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just good to know. I think it's just interesting to know a bit of the context to it all.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely run across it.
All right. Magic, do you have anything else to close your update? All right. Next one, Jesse. You again.
Oh, man. All right. So, I mean, some of them we've already covered. Yeah, I do think the major things that Fran has touched on, sort of the publish, subscribe, confusion. I think that's important, and I think Fran has pointed to sort of a confusion about local and remote bindings. That I disagree. I think that should be solved within the bindings themselves. But I think that's an important thing for us to work out as a community. Let's just see Fran's comment there. And then I think the sort of the object reuse, although I think we're sort of moving in that direction anyway. The multi-protocol support would be on my list. And again, this isn't like, I don't think by any means is my list definitive, but I just wanted to, I think we should talk as a community about what's important that we nail and what's important that we don't consider. And I do think sort of the classic debate about, should we have an endpoint object? I'm not saying that like there has to be, but I think that deserves serious discussion, because I think having an endpoint object opens us up to a lot more possibilities. And maybe it's too complex and we don't want to go there, and that's too unlike other specs. But it does feel like that gives us some really interesting enterprise capabilities. Yeah, and sort of in line with Magic's proposal, sort of thinking more seriously about references and sort of the implications of extending and referencing other documents and what takes priority when you do that. So that would be my priority list. That was not, the intent was not to say like, this is what Jesse thinks should be a priority. And this is more just like a placeholder to say that we should, at the outset, try to come up with some things that we think are important for us to conquer here. Sorry, my wife is calling me.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So it's more a question of like, what would be required to solve before we release a 3.0?
Yeah, like I guess it's begging for scope. Yes,
begging for scope. Yeah.
But I would be really, really interested to hear other people's perspective on that.
I wanted to quickly highlight something. So currently we do have a milestone in the Spec repo that has all of the issues that we think might need to be reconsidered or considered for 3.0 release. It contains all of the issues that might be a breaking change in the future or would require a breaking change, maybe. And these are kind of all of the issues that we try to bundle together. There can be new ones, they can be removed once resolved or once a decision is reached. But we still follow the contribution guidelines. I mean, everything goes through IFCs. If you want something to change, make an issue about it, discuss it, clarify things, make a PR, and then it's included in 3.0. What exactly needs to be happen for a 3.0 release? I mean, it depends on so many things, right? But everything comes down to the publish subscribe confusion, in my opinion. That is what triggered this discussion. That's what's triggering these meetings. It's what drives the confusion at the moment that needs to be solved. I wanted to say something else, but I can't remember it. Oh yeah, Dale, who's running the 2.3 release at the moment, added this work on 2.3 release, and I love this idea of having everything within one issue, more or less, like the progress, who is working on which issues, who are championing issues through, right? So as soon as 2.3 is done, or maybe also just after this meeting, maybe it makes sense to make this issue to track what is happening, what needs to be done, what is still missing. Maybe that makes a bit of clarity. It's just a suggestion.
I think it's great. I do think that sort of grouping of issues together will be really, really useful too. I mean, I think we just need to invest a mechanism by which we track things. I think first of all, I'm not, I think they all look good, but I think maybe we should, as a group or individually offline, walk through each one and make sure that they're all still relevant and should be considered in version 3, because I'm not entirely sure they're not. Some of them are stale, but that does seem like a really good place to start.
I have a question regarding this. Should we kind of, because there are like a lot of issues there in that milestone. So as Jesse said, some of them could be stale, but should we do some kind of, or should we ask the community to somehow vote or to sort this list by priorities somehow? Because maybe we can move efforts into one issue that community thinks is more important than the others, and not only take those that already have champions. Like we can look for champions for those that are important. It's what I want to say. How can we know that?
Another way of prioritizing it, though, might be which ones are such major breaking changes that if we don't do it at 3.0, it would have to wait till 4.0. Like, because we kind of want to make sure that all the really disruptive stuff happens at once, so we don't disrupt everyone multiple times.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Some of the ones where maybe they wouldn't be hugely disruptive, maybe they could wait to a 3.1 or something. But I think we need to prioritize the ones that need to happen up front.
One point to that is it's kind of difficult in many cases. For example, the meaning of async on an async API file, it depends on what level you want it, like, to solve it. That's the problem. Many of these issues are, well, we can do a breaking change, and this would require this and this and this, but we can also do the non-breaking one, and it all depends on the use cases and the specifics. So many of these issues are going to be a lot of discussion back and forth. But it needs to happen, right? So.
Yeah, well, I agree with I think everything that's been said, and I do think opening it up to the community, and obviously the people who are on this call, I think are probably the most vested, or at least have shown the most interest. So, let's say, and maybe commit that before the next meeting, we actually go through and sort of do a triage on those issues, and if there's things that are missing, add issues to that list, so that we can come in 2 weeks from now and have that be a basis for discussion, because that does seem like a really good organizing principle to me.
I think that makes sense. That's a good.
Frank is saying something there in the chat that I don't quite understand. So, Frank, you're saying that all these should be considered, which doesn't mean that they have to be in V3. Okay. But you're saying before we release V3, we have to look at all of them and make sure they are not introducing breaking changes?
What he
So
means
I'm
is,
quite confused.
I think what he means is that the issues that are linked on that specific milestone does not mean that they have to be introduced in order to release 3.0, because some of them can be fixed or solved using a non-breaking change. But in order to know that, we still have to dive into and kind of reflect on what needs to happen for these issues. Correct me if I'm wrong, friend. But, yeah.
I've always assumed that version 3 would be breaking changes with version 2, that it'll change so much that they'd be incompatible. Is that a wrong assumption?
Can you say it again, Michael? I didn't hear.
Yeah, I had assumed that version 3 would be so different from version 2 that it would all be like a big breaking change.
Yep. But it doesn't mean that we have to change it just because it's a request, right? Or it has to be a breaking change just because it's might be.
Yeah.
But yes, it's the right assumption. Yeah.
But I mean, I guess the question is, we're not going under the assumption that we're not allowing ourselves to have breaking changes, right? Like we will allow ourselves to make breaking changes in version 3?
Yes, of course, yes.
Okay.
Anything that makes the life easier for you to work and use async API files, in my opinion. Anything that you find weird or doesn't work or anything like that, let's what's it called? Like,
Review.
yeah, make it better, basically, and
Yeah.
break as much as possible if that means that it's easier to understand and easier to use. At least in my opinion, yeah.
I agree. I think Fran kind of won me over with that one. Originally, I was aiming for backwards compatibility, but I do think that we should, as you stated, Jonas, get it as good as we can get it and move forward.
I have something to add there. So I agree we have to do breaking changes. So that's, from my point of view, the purpose of this new release, this new measure. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a measure, right? But should we set some kind of line between, I don't know how to express this, how many breaking changes we want to add in there? Just to, I mean, I don't want to have like users to say, yeah, I'm gonna give up because moving from 2x to 3x is like super hard. I know we are gonna build some tool around, but v3 adoption should be either like a pain, So I'm wondering if we should somehow set a line,
I think
like a limit
I think it
on
comes
which
down.
kind of, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I think it comes down to what Jesse and Dale said. Like, I think you need to set a scope, because if you don't set a scope and a line, then okay, we'll accept everything. Okay, so who's triaging? There's, I'm looking at this list now, and there's stuff from 2018, and I'm like, okay, I want to know how is that made. For example, I don't know how has that made the list. Is it still relevant? Because it's going to be quite difficult to. Yeah, it's going to step one. It's going to be hard to just identify the scope of this thing, and I think even harder to probably say what we're not going to do, right? To actually say, okay, we know that's a problem, but this might just have to wait for a minute or two. I don't know. But as Dale said, I agree with what Dale's saying about we probably want to use the opportunity for the 3 release, because you can have to wait so many months for a 4, right? So, but I think it's key. So yeah, what you're saying is definitely, surely we have to have a line like any kind of project, right? It's just to define the scope, define what we want to do somehow, and that might be the hardest thing, because kind of like grooming 50 tickets. It's like, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that in open source stuff. I guess it's just people would champion. As you were saying, Jonas. If someone wants to champion it, that if these issues don't have a champion, do they deserve? I don't know what happens to them. If someone comes up with an idea and then disappears for, I mean, this has been 2 years here, but disappears, then I don't know. But I think it'd be easier for next steps, or at least, as someone mentioned, to go through the list and try and triage. Or, and like Jonas, I like the idea of having that one page that Dale's done, so we can actually keep a track of, okay, what's happening here, because it's really hard at the moment for me anyway to kind of go between this issue and all 3 tags, and it's like I can't keep up. But
yeah, it's actually a really great question and discussion, and I feel like we need another issue for this, or a discussion in some sense. So my recommendation would be to start a new issue discussion and then move the discussion there, because it's something that's really relevant. I think at the moment it's just a milestone, and it's anything can be added to it at the moment because there's no maybe clear vision for it, for that specific. But as Fran also said, like pops up confusion, channel reusability, and many meanings, that's some of the core issues that tries to be solved. It doesn't mean that new features need to be added as well.
Got it. Well, I mean, it's interesting. What Lucas is bringing up here. And first of all, Fran, thank you for thank you for celebrating the fact that you convinced me. That's awesome. I think, yeah, we've got 8 minutes left, and maybe this is the point where we start talking about what we're going to do in the interim. I guess my proposal would be that every 2 weeks is probably not going to be enough to sustain momentum on this, especially something as important. So I guess my proposal will be to move this meeting to weekly. I know it's a pain in the butt, and I don't want to have more meetings, but this discussion I think is really, really important, and it has been, just today has been really fun and useful for me. So I would first propose that, and second, to have some sort of systematized way of us all commenting on each of those things within the milestone.
Yep, I think that's a great suggestion. Do you mind making an issue or discussion for it, Jesse? So we can keep it there? Because that way everyone can raise their concerns in that.
Sure, the issue would be taking this to weekly or taking it to sort of a triage of V3.
I think it makes sense for maybe both, up to you.
Okay.
But yeah. I guess we jump straight to the last subject. Sergey?
Yeah, I'm gonna be super quick. Regarding the proposal Fran made about the poop soup, I split it up in some issues that some of them are gonna be landing on 2.3 already, and this one is allowing servers and channels to be defined inside components. As I say, this is already going to happen on 2.3, or at least this is what it seems, right?
It is what it's right. So.
Yeah. So what is left on the tickets I created for 3.0 is one ticket that basically was making channels feel optional on the whole async API file. This was aiming to be in 2.3, but thank you, Jonas, because you discovered this was a breaking change. So it's postponed for 3.0 if it makes sense by then. Then there is another one that it's letting channels to be identified by ID rather than their address, which is basically adding. So reusing. Sorry, how can it? If without linking, it's gonna be a mess. This is. So it's basically adding a new. It's fine. Basically adding a new address field into the channels so that they can be used for the address and don't identify channels by their address, but rather by a unique ID. We can discuss about it on the issue. But what I wanted to raise, and you're gonna like it, Jesse, it's the remote and local servers stuff. So how can we tackle this, right? So I created a new issue so we can discuss properly instead of using the PubSub one because it's getting, so it's like a mess right now to discuss in there. I'm gonna paste it here. And what I put it there, it's basically 2 suggestions on how to solve the remote and local servers if we want to do it. The proposal one is using the kind field on server object, and the other is like splitting servers into remotes and servers or locals. I'm not leaning towards any solution. So I just want to raise this and start a proper discussion with some conclusions and reaching some conclusions, basically. So please, all of you, the ones that are watching, the ones that are here connected, please go in and share your thoughts on it. And that's it. It was super quick.
Thank you.
I've got a quick, just a quick question. It's kind of related to that, but also the other issues, and also going forward with these meetings. So 3.0 spec, there's going to be quite big things that are changing, yeah, and big ideas and big things to consider, which take a long time to digest, right? A long time to read and think about and even understand. And for me, it's quite difficult to sometimes quite difficult to gain context in the issues and stuff. And like when they're small, it's okay, but when you're talking about massive changes, it's like really hard just to understand. So I don't know if we should use these kind of meetings in the future too. What I'd like to see is like go into these, like for example, if we use next week's meeting or whatever, and I'm not sure how this would work, and that's why I'm asking for feedback, but we could dive into the remote and local servers issue, yeah, as a whole hour where we just talk about, okay, this is why, like start literally from the top, like no one's heard this stuff before, right? This is what's happening now. This is why I'm recommending this. And let's discuss. And then the discussion is recorded. We can share it, and then and we can write up our thoughts on the issue afterwards. So we have two forms of communication. One is the issue for historic, and one is just for open discussions. Because I think sometimes it's a lot easier in these big things to come on stream. I don't know, draw up some diagrams, talk about things, and then whatever, you know. I don't know if that'll help other people or not. So definitely help me like participate in some of this stuff.
It would be a lot more work for the person who adds something to the agenda, because they're going to have to distill that long meandering issue down into the nub. But it would definitely make conversation and debate easier because of that time invested in distilling it down. So if people are willing to do that kind of prep, I absolutely think it would make these calls more effective.
Definitely. Totally agree.
Yeah,
I don't remember why I don't like server and remote right now. So it'll even be helpful for me.
I have to say I didn't leak previous comments. So your comments are not linked in purpose. Just you don't bias people. I'm kidding.
But yeah, maybe just to give a notice. So everyone is welcome, and this is just to emphasize, everyone is welcome to start a meeting. Everyone is welcome to start a stream. I mean, it's open for everyone to do whatever you feel is necessary to make awareness of a specific issue or discussing something. It's just reaching out, start a discussion the same way I did with 3.0, and then get access to it. So yeah. But yeah, I feel like it's really necessary as well, Dave. Whether it's fitting for this specific 3.0 meeting, maybe not. But as a separate, solely focused on maybe one specific issue where you dial in, that would be, yeah, really helpful.
Cool. I'll write it as Jesse, when you put up your discussion weekly idea, I'll write it as a comment on that one, on the thread, and see if we can get momentum on that.
That's great.
Cool.
I like it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and everyone in the chat watching. I think that's more or less ends the stream, unless anyone has something final to say.
Yeah, I think it's been really great, and it's been nice just to interact with everybody. So looking forward to next time, whenever that is, and hopefully Fran can actually troll me in person rather than in text. That'd be great. See you, everybody.
See you, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.